Chapter 1, The Calm Before the Chaos. The air buzzed with anticipation in the sprawling convention center in Los Angeles. Rows of gleaming LED panels, stacks of powerful speakers, and intricate lighting rigs formed an impressive tapestry of technology and precision. The floor gleamed under the bright white light as the team of BrightPulse Productions, a full-service event company, moved with choreographed efficiency. The event was a high-profile corporate launch for a tech giant, bigger than anything the team had tackled before. The stakes were sky-high, and every move mattered. Dylan Hart, the team's technical lead, surveyed the scene with a mixture of pride and anxiety. His job wasn't just about assembling equipment. It was about telling a story through light, sound, and visuals. A seasoned pro in his early 30s, Dylan wore his signature black t-shirt and cargo pants, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. He could translate the chaos of production into perfect harmony, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a subtle hum beneath the surface of the buzzing machinery. On the other side of the room, Clara Moreno meticulously arranged her gear. The video manager and livestream specialist, she had a knack for making complex setups look effortless. With her colorful bandana and camera harness strapped across her petite frame, Clara exuded a cool confidence. But underneath, she was always running scenarios in her head, anticipating what could go wrong, because something always did. "Hey, Clara!" Jake Barnes called out as he wheeled a flight case past her. Jake, the team's sound engineer, was a towering figure with a booming laugh and an endless arsenal of stories from past gigs. He was the heart of the crew, the one who could make a 14-hour shift feel like a breeze. Clara looked up from her equipment. "Jake, if you scratch that case again, you're buying me coffee. And not the cheap stuff." Jake grinned. "You've got yourself a deal. Assuming you can survive a day without being a control freak." Meanwhile, in a corner of the venue, Ravi Patel was engrossed in the wiring schematic spread across a table. The lighting designer was a quiet genius whose work often went unnoticed, until the moment the lights came on and transformed the space into something magical. Ravi was Dylan's right hand, the steady rock to Dylan's dynamic energy. As the team hustled to finish setup, Marco Rivera, the newest hire, lugged a bundle of cables toward the main stage. Marco was eager to prove himself, but his inexperience often showed. He was the kind of guy who wanted to help but didn't always think things through. Today, he was in charge of cabling, a responsibility that seemed straightforward enough, but in the world of event production, even small mistakes could snowball into disasters. Dylan's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie. "Team, we're on the clock. I need everyone focused. Marco, how's the cabling coming along?" "All good, boss." Marco replied, sweat beading on his forehead. He had double-checked the connections, or at least he thought he had. The countdown to the event ticked closer. The client was due to arrive in an hour for a final walkthrough, and every element had to be flawless. Dylan moved from station to station, checking in with the team. Clara was setting up the live stream rig, Jake was fine-tuning the audio mix, and Ravi was programming the light sequences. But then it happened. As Marco plugged in the final power cable, a loud pop echoed through the venue, followed by a flicker of lights. The LED panels went dark, and the hum of the equipment ceased. A tense silence fell over the room, broken only by the faint sound of Clara muttering, "Oh no, what did he do?" Dylan rushed to the stage, his heart pounding. "What's going on? Talk to me." Marco stood frozen, his face pale. I think I might have plugged something into the wrong port." Dylan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "All right, everyone, let's figure this out. Jake, check the power distribution. Clara, see if the feed is still intact. Ravi, start troubleshooting the lighting grid. Marco, just stay put." The team sprang into action, but the clock was ticking. The client would be here any minute, and the thought of explaining a massive failure was unbearable. As Dylan barked orders, his mind raced through the possibilities. Was it just a tripped circuit, or had something more serious occurred? Clara's voice cut through the tension. "The feed's dead. This isn't just a power issue. Something's fried." Jake chimed in. main breaker's intact, but the surge might have taken out the distro box. Ravi added, the lighting grid isn't responding. We might be looking at a cascade failure. Dylan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a hiccup, it was a full-blown crisis. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Marco, whose well-meaning mistake had thrown the entire event into jeopardy. As the team scrambled to diagnose the problem, Dylan couldn't shake the feeling that this was the kind of test that could make or break them. He locked eyes with Clara, who gave him a slight nod. They'd been through tough gigs before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about fixing the gear, it was about proving they could handle anything that came their way. And so, with the clock ticking and the pressure mounting, BrightPulse Productions braced themselves for what would undoubtedly be the longest day of their careers. Chapter 2. Threads Unraveling. The day had turned into a race against the clock. The team at BrightPulse Productions was no stranger to high-pressure situations. But this was uncharted territory. The faint smell of burnt circuitry hung in the air, mingling with the scent of anticipation and dread. Clara, Jake, Ravi, Dylan, and Marco were all focused on a single task, bringing the event back to life before the client and guests arrived. Dylan paced near the control station, his brows furrowed in concentration. His hands danced over his tablet, checking the equipment logs for any anomalies. He knew there was no time for blame. They needed solutions. Marco lingered nearby, alternating between apologizing under his breath and trying to make himself useful. His face mirrored a desperate desire to redeem himself, though no one had yet voiced any accusations. Clara was crouched on the ground, examining the livestream setup. The elegant and polished array of cameras and feeds now looked lifeless. "It's not just fried," she muttered, pushing her hair back with an exasperated sigh. "It's roasted, deep-fried, and served on a platter." Whatever surge happened, it went straight through the system. Jake joined her, his wide frame blocking the harsh overhead lights as he knelt down to inspect the connections. "Let me check something," he said, his voice unusually subdued. Jake's usual bravado was gone, replaced by an intense focus. He rummaged through his toolkit, pulling out a multimeter to measure the current. In the meantime, Ravi had retreated to the lighting grid. The soft glow of his tablet illuminated his face as he ran diagnostics. Each failed connection report that popped up on the screen only deepened the pit in his stomach. "Dylan," he called out, not looking up, "the system isn't responding to my commands. If the surge hit the power distribution unit, it's possible the DMX controllers are down too." Dylan nodded, processing Ravi's words. "All right, prioritize the main stage lights for now. We need to focus on getting some functionality back, anything we can salvage." As they worked, the team's individual stresses began to surface in small ways. Clara snapped at Jake when he accidentally knocked over one of her cables. Jake muttered something under his breath about needing a miracle. Ravi grew unusually quiet, his calm demeanor masking his growing frustration. And Marco became the unwilling lightning rod for their collective anxiety. "Marco," Clara said, her voice sharp, "exactly how did you connect these cables? Show me." Marco hesitated, the color draining from his face. I thought I followed the diagram, but maybe I swapped the ports. It's hard to tell now with everything." "Hard to tell," Clara cut in, her tone bordering on incredulous. "Marco, this isn't a home stereo system. One wrong connection can take out an entire network." Dylan stepped in before the situation could escalate further. "Clara, enough," he said firmly. "We've all made mistakes before. Let's focus on fixing this." Clara bit her lip, realizing she'd crossed the line. "Sorry," she muttered, turning back to her equipment. Dylan placed a reassuring hand on Marco's shoulder. "Listen, mistakes happen. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Just stay sharp and follow instructions. We're counting on you." Marco nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, Dylan. Just tell me what to do." As the minutes slipped by, the team started to make incremental progress. Ravi managed to isolate a part of the lighting grid that could be brought back online. Jake rerouted power to the secondary sound system, bypassing the fried distro box. Clara rigged a temporary livestream solution, though it was far from ideal. But then, another setback hit. The master control board, a crucial piece of equipment for syncing the various systems, refused to power on. Dylan stared at it in disbelief. Without the control board, they couldn't coordinate the audio, visuals, and lighting for the show. It was the heart of the operation, and it was dead. This isn't just a technical issue anymore, Dylan said, addressing the team. We're looking at a complete systems failure. If we can't get the master board running, we're done. The weight of his words settled over the team like a heavy fog. They exchanged glances, each of them silently grappling with the enormity of the situation. For the first time, doubt began to creep in. Could they pull this off, or had they finally met their match? And then Marco spoke up. "I have an idea," he said hesitantly. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others skeptical. "Spit it out," Dylan said, his tone neutral but firm. Marco took a deep breath. "Back at my internship, we had a similar issue during a live event. The master board failed, and we couldn't replace it in time. So we built a workaround. It wasn't perfect, but it got us through the event." Dylan frowned. "A workaround? Marco, we're dealing with a multi-system integration here, not a karaoke night. You're saying we bypass the master board entirely?" Marco nodded. "Yes, it'll be rough, but it's possible. We need everyone to pitch in." The room fell silent as the team considered Marco's proposal. It was a risky move, one that could either save the event or seal their fate. Dylan finally spoke. "All right, let's hear the details. But if we're doing this, we're doing it as a team." Marco's face lit up with a mixture of relief and determination. For the first time that day, he felt like he could contribute something meaningful. He began explaining his plan, sketching out diagrams on the back of a clipboard. The team listened intently, their doubts slowly giving way to a shared sense of purpose. As they dove into action, the clock continued its relentless march. The client was due to arrive in 30 minutes, and the fate of the event now rested on a cobbled-together solution and a team unwilling to give up. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. The air was thick with urgency as BrightPulse Productions dove into Marco's improvised plan. The team's collective energy shifted. Doubts about the rookie's idea were swept aside by the relentless ticking of the clock. If there was one thing they had in common, it was an unshakable determination to make this event a success, no matter the odds. Marco stood at the makeshift command center, flipping through his hastily sketched diagrams. His confidence wavered as the others gathered around, their seasoned gazes scrutinizing every detail. Dylan leaned over his shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning the plan for flaws. "All right, Marco," Dylan said, his tone steady but probing. "Walk us through it step by step. We don't have time for guesswork." Marco swallowed hard and began to explain. "The core idea is to bypass the master control board entirely. We'll need to manually sync the sound, visuals, and lighting systems using individual controllers. It's not ideal, and the timing will be tricky, but if we coordinate closely, it can work." Clara folded her arms. Skepticism etched across her face. "And how do you propose we handle the livestream? It's already running on a backup feed, and I doubt it can handle much more stress." Marco hesitated. He hadn't accounted for the live stream complications in his plan. "Well, we could," he stammered. Jake cut in, his deep voice tinged with impatience. "Look, the plan's not perfect, but it's what we've got. Clara, can't you simplify the feed? Reduce the resolution or something?" Clara sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can try, but it's going to look like a potato stream. Don't expect any awards for production quality." "Let's just focus on functionality for now," Dylan interjected. "Ravi, what's the status on the lighting grid?" Ravi's voice was calm but grim. "I've isolated a section that's still operational, but we'll lose all dynamic effects. It'll be static lighting only." Dylan nodded. "Fine, let's prioritize the main stage. Marco, you're leading this workaround. You call it, we follow. Got it?" Marco blinked, surprised by the sudden weight of responsibility thrust upon him. "Got it," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The team dispersed, each member diving into their assigned tasks. Ravi worked methodically on the lighting grid, his steady hands a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. Clara streamlined the livestream setup, muttering a constant stream of curses under her breath. Jake rerouted audio connections with an efficiency born of years of experience. And Dylan moved between stations, coordinating like a battlefield commander. But as the minutes passed, cracks began to show, not just in the equipment, but in the team itself. The pressure was taking its toll, fraying tempers and exposing vulnerabilities. "Clara, I need that feed live now." Dylan barked, his usual calm slipping. "I'm working on it." Clara snapped back. "Maybe if I had a little less micromanaging and a little more support, this would go faster." Jake, overhearing the exchange, couldn't resist a jab. "Oh, so now it's Dylan's fault? Maybe you should focus on your own job instead of pointing fingers." "Enough." Dylan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "We don't have time for this. Focus on the task at hand." The silence that followed was heavy. But it was enough to pull the team back from the brink. They returned to their work, each driven by a mix of professionalism and sheer stubbornness. Meanwhile, Marco found himself in uncharted territory. For the first time, he wasn't just an assistant or a runner. He was the one calling the shots. The weight of it was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. As he moved between stations, checking on progress and making adjustments, he began to understand the enormity of what Dylan dealt with every day. But just as things seemed to be stabilizing, a new problem arose. The backup power supply, a crucial component of Marco's workaround, began to overheat. The warning light on the unit blinked ominously, casting a red glow over the control station. "Dylan," Marco called out, panic creeping into his voice. "We've got a problem with the backup supply. If it fails, we're done." Dylan rushed over, his jaw tightening as he assessed the situation. "Ravi, can we divert power from the auxiliary grid?" Ravi glanced up from his tablet. "Not without losing lighting on the side stages. Do we risk it?" Dylan's mind raced. Losing the side stages would be noticeable, but a complete power failure would be catastrophic. He locked eyes with Marco, who was waiting anxiously for a decision. "We risk it," Dylan said finally. "Ravi, make it happen. Marco, keep an eye on that supply. If it starts to fail completely, shut it down manually." As Ravi worked to reroute power, Marco hovered near the backup supply, his heart pounding. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all his fault. If he had been more careful, more attentive, none of this would have happened. But now wasn't the time for self-pity. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to let the team down again. The minutes felt like hours, but eventually the warning light on the backup supply dimmed, indicating that the overheating issue had been resolved for now. Marco let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling from the adrenaline. Dylan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Good work, Marco. Keep it up." The simple words meant more to Marco than Dylan could have known. For the first time that day, he felt like he belonged. But the reprieve was short-lived. As the clock ticked closer to showtime, another obstacle loomed on the horizon. One that would test the team's limits in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 4, Strained Connections. The countdown to the event's start loomed closer, its urgency bearing down on the BrightPulse team like an unrelenting tide. Every second felt heavier, every malfunction magnified by the increasing weight of expectation. Despite some initial progress, the truth remained stark. They were far from ready. Clara was hunched over her workstation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she monitored the livestream stability. Her streamlining efforts were barely holding, the system buckling under the stress of makeshift adjustments. She stole a glance at the clock, her pulse quickening. There were only 25 minutes left. "Jake, I need you here for a second." Clara's voice cut through the hum of activity. Jake, who was fine-tuning the backup sound system, paused to look over. "What now?" he asked, though his tone lacked the usual bite of his banter. "I've managed to stabilize the feed for now, but it's glitching every time the camera switches views. I need a second set of hands to keep it from crashing entirely." Jake sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. All right, but if the audio blows out while I'm here, you're explaining it to Dylan? Clara smirked despite herself. Deal. Meanwhile, at the lighting grid, Ravi was dealing with his own frustrations. The lack of dynamic effects meant the lighting sequence lacked its usual polish, a fact that gnawed at his perfectionist streak. He tapped furiously on his tablet, searching for a way to eke out just a bit more functionality. Each failed attempt chipped away at his calm exterior. Dylan, ever the linchpin of the team, moved between them like a man possessed. He carried with him an air of controlled urgency, his sharp commands and quick thinking keeping the group from descending into chaos. But even Dylan wasn't immune to the pressure. The edges of his composure were fraying, his usual steady presence flickering like a light on the verge of burning out. And then there was Marco, the rookie, once a symbol of the team's collective frustrations, had become an unlikely centerpiece of the operation. His improvised plan, though far from perfect, had given them a path forward, but the responsibility weighed on him heavily. Every step he took felt like walking a tightrope, the risk of failure ever present. "Marco!" Dylan called out, snapping the younger man out of his thoughts. "What's the status on the backup supply?" Marco hurried over, checking the unit's indicators. "It's holding steady for now, but it's running hotter than I'd like. We might need to shut it down for a few minutes to cool off." Dylan frowned. "Not an option. If we shut it down now, we'll lose everything we've got online. Keep an eye on it, and let me know the second it shows signs of failing." "Got it," Marco replied, though his confidence was starting to waver again. The minutes ticked by, each one a painful reminder of how little time they had left. The atmosphere was tense, the team's collective focus pushed to its limits. But despite the mounting pressure, they continued to work together, driven by the shared goal of pulling off the impossible. At one point, Clara glanced over at Dylan. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of equipment. "You okay?" Dylan looked at her, surprised by the question. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I'm fine." "Why?" "You just seem, I don't know, more on edge than usual." Dylan forced a smile. "Comes with the territory. Don't worry about me. Just focus on the stream." Clara nodded, but the concern in her eyes lingered. Dylan's facade of unshakable confidence was starting to crack, and she could see it. But there was no time to dwell on it, not now. With 15 minutes left, the team was running on sheer determination. The lighting grid was operational, though barely. The backup sound system was holding, but only just. The live stream was live, but its stability hung by a thread. And through it all, the master control board remained a lifeless husk, a stark reminder of the day's earlier failures. Then, as if the universe had decided they hadn't suffered enough, disaster struck again. The backup power supply, the fragile lifeline holding their operation together, began to emit a faint but unmistakable whining sound. Marco's heart sank as he noticed the warning light flickering back to life. "Dylan," he shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "The supply's overheating again." Dylan rushed over, his mind racing. "Shut it down," he ordered. "We can't risk it blowing out completely." Marco hesitated. "But if we shut it down now, we'll figure it out." Dylan snapped. "Just do it." Reluctantly, Marco powered down the unit. The hum of equipment faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The team froze, the enormity of what had just happened sinking in. For the first time that day, Dylan's composure broke. He slammed a fist onto the table, his frustration spilling over. "This can't be happening," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Clara, Jake, Ravi, and Marco exchanged uneasy glances. The unspoken question hung in the air. What now? As the silence stretched on, it was Marco who finally spoke. "We still have the individual controllers," he said quietly. "If we sync them manually..." "No," Dylan interrupted, his voice firm. "We've pushed this jury-rigged setup as far as it'll go. It's not enough." "But..." Marco started, only to be cut off again. "I said no." Dylan barked, his frustration boiling over. The team flinched at the uncharacteristic outburst. For a moment, no one said anything. The weight of their situation pressed down on them, threatening to crush what little hope remained. And then, almost imperceptibly, Clara stepped forward. "Dylan," she said softly, her voice steady, "we can do this. We've faced worse, remember? That charity gala in Paris? The equipment failure at the festival in Tokyo? We pulled through then and we'll pull through now." Dylan looked at her, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "This is different," he said. Clara shook her head. "It's only different if we give up, and I don't think any of us are ready to do that." Her words hung in the air, a lifeline for a team on the verge of collapse. One by one, the others nodded, their resolve hardening. Dylan took a deep breath, his frustration giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. "All right," he said, "finally, let's make it happen." As the team rallied together, the clock continued its relentless march. The odds were against them, but BrightPulse Productions wasn't about to back down. Not now, not ever. Chapter 5, The Thin Line of Resilience. As the final 10 minutes ticked away, the pressure in the convention center felt like a tangible force. Every member of the BrightPulse team was hyper-focused, the fatigue on their faces offset by sheer determination. Failure was no longer an option, it never had been. Yet somehow, the stakes seemed even higher now, with so little time left to fix what felt irreparable. Clara worked feverishly at her livestream station, her fingers moving with instinctive precision over the keyboard. She'd managed to coax the system into cooperation, but it was still a fragile, temperamental beast. Beside her, Jake monitored the backup sound system, his gaze flickering between the console and Clara's progress. It wasn't often that the sound engineer sat quietly, but even he had no jokes to offer now. Marco hovered near Dylan, his nerves teetering between panic and resolve. The shutdown of the backup power supply had been a bitter blow, and while he knew the team trusted him, he felt the weight of every mistake, every choice he'd made. Despite Dylan's earlier outburst, Marco could tell that his mentor was holding it together for the sake of the team. "Marco," Dylan said suddenly, snapping him back to reality, "grab the manual controllers from the spares case. We're gonna need them in 2 minutes." "Yes, sir," Marco replied, his voice steadier than he'd expected. He sprinted to the equipment case, grabbing the controllers and returning to the makeshift command center. Ravi was already there, syncing the controllers to the individual systems as quickly as his hands could move. "Here," Marco said, handing the controllers to Dylan and Ravi. His gaze drifted to Clara. "How's the live stream holding up?" Clara didn't look up. "Ask me in 5 minutes. If we make it that far." Marco nodded, unsure if she was joking or serious. Ravi's calm voice broke the silence. "Dylan, we're synced. Lighting is ready for manual operation. It'll be basic, but it'll work." "Good," Dylan said. He looked at the others. "This is it, people. All hands on deck. We've got one chance to make this work." The team nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of the moment. Dylan took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "Clara, keep the live stream stable at all costs. Jake, focus on audio synchronization. Ravi, you're on lighting cues. Marco, you're with me on system monitoring. Let's bring this event back to life." The command galvanized the team. Clara's fingers flew across the keyboard as she tweaked the feed. Jake adjusted the sound levels with the precision of a conductor, and Ravi's hands moved deftly over the controllers. Marco, though still uncertain, stood beside Dylan, watching the monitors and calling out readings as they worked. 5 minutes, Dylan announced. "How's everyone doing?" "Live stream's holding," Clara replied, though her tone betrayed her nerves. "Audio's good, boss," Jake said, giving a thumbs up. "Not perfect, but solid." "Lighting ready," Ravi confirmed. "Static, but it'll do the job." Dylan glanced at Marco. "Power supply?" Marco checked the indicators. "Holding steady. No overheating so far." For the first time in hours, Dylan felt a flicker of hope. The plan, however improvised, was working, but they weren't out of the woods yet. 2 minutes, Dylan said. "Let's sync everything for the final run." As the team worked, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Every adjustment, Every command carried the weight of their collective effort. The clock ticked down mercilessly, each second both an ally and an enemy. And then, just as they synced the final systems, the doors to the venue opened. The client and their entourage entered, their polished suits and confident smiles in stark contrast to the frayed and exhausted team. Dylan straightened, his heart pounding. This was it. No room for error. The client, a sharp-eyed executive in her early 40s, approached Dylan. "Everything ready?" she asked, her tone curt but not unkind. "Yes," Dylan replied, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. "You'll have a flawless presentation." The executive nodded, her gaze sweeping over the setup. "Good. We'll begin in 1 minute." Dylan turned back to his team. "All right, showtime. Positions, everyone." The team dispersed, each member settling into their roles. Dylan and Marco remained at the command center, their eyes glued to the monitors. The room fell silent, the weight of anticipation filling the air. And then, with a single nod from the executive, the event began. Lights illuminated the stage, the sound system came to life, and the LED panels glowed with vibrant images. Clara monitored the livestream feed, her eyes darting between the screen and the keyboard. Ravi adjusted the lighting cues with practiced ease, while Jake fine-tuned the audio in real time. From the command center, Dylan and Marco watched the event unfold. Every second felt like a victory, every successful transition a testament to their teamwork and determination. By the time the first presentation ended, the client's approving smile was enough to lift the weight from Dylan's shoulders. He glanced at Marco, who was staring at the monitors with a mixture of awe and relief. "We did it," Marco whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Dylan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Marco. We couldn't have done this without you." Marco looked at him, the words sinking in. For the first time all day, he felt like he belonged, not just as a member of the team, but as someone who could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. As the event continued, the team settled into a rhythm. The initial panic and chaos gave way to a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had faced the worst and come out the other side stronger. But deep down, they all knew the day wasn't over yet. The final act still loomed, and with it, the possibility of one last challenge. Chapter 6, A Turn of the Tide. With the initial rush of relief fading, the BrightPulse team braced themselves for the remainder of the event. Though the first presentation had gone off without a hitch, the day was far from over. The executive's approving smile had only raised the stakes. Now, the team needed to maintain that standard until the last curtain call. Dylan stood at the command center, his shoulders tense, but his mind sharp. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not yet. Marco was by his side, monitoring the backup systems with a quiet focus. For the rookie, the validation from Dylan and the team had been a turning point, but he knew one slip could unravel everything. Clara, perched at her live stream station, was deep in the zone. Her fingers danced over the keyboard as she adjusted camera angles and smoothed out transitions. Despite her earlier skepticism, she had to admit Marco's workaround was holding, however precariously. She muttered to herself as she worked, a mix of tech jargon and colorful language that only Jake seemed to find amusing. "Everything running smoothly over there, Clara?" Jake called out, his tone light, but probing. He was stationed at the audio console, his practiced hands making micro-adjustments to the sound mix. "For now," Clara replied without looking up. "But if this feed drops mid-presentation, I'm holding you personally responsible." Jake chuckled. "I'll take the blame if you buy the celebratory drinks later." "Deal," Clara said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. At the lighting grid, Ravi was in his element, despite the limitations of the static setup. His precise control over the cues added a sense of rhythm to the event, compensating for the lack of dynamic effects. He glanced over at Dylan and gave a subtle nod, a silent assurance that the lights would hold. But as the second act of the event began, a new challenge emerged. The client had requested an impromptu addition to the program, A live Q&A session with the executives on stage. The announcement sent a ripple of unease through the team, especially Dylan. A live segment introduced a host of variables they hadn't accounted for. "Are you kidding me?" Clara said, her voice rising in disbelief. "A Q&A? Do they realize how fragile this setup is?" "We don't have a choice," Dylan said, his tone firm. "We adapt. Jake, we'll need to reconfigure the audio for handheld mics. Clara, prep the cameras for tighter angles. Ravi, adjust the lighting to focus on the stage." "And what about me?" Marco asked, eager to contribute. Dylan considered for a moment. "Stay on power monitoring. If anything starts to falter, I want to know immediately." The team sprang into action, the tension thick, but their movements precise. Jake scrambled to configure the handheld microphones, his hands moving faster than his mouth, a rare occurrence. Clara adjusted the camera positions, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ravi fine-tuned the stage lighting, his tablet glowing softly in the dim control area. As the executives took the stage for the Q&A, the room seemed to hold its breath. The microphones crackled to life, the lights bathed the stage in a warm glow, and the cameras captured every detail. For a moment, it seemed like they had pulled it off. But then, mid-question, a faint flicker ran through the LED panels behind the executives. Dylan's heart sank as he recognized the telltale sign of a power instability. He glanced at Marco, who was already checking the backup supply. "Marco, talk to me," Dylan said, his voice low but urgent. "The supply's stable, but the load is spiking. If it keeps climbing, we're going to lose the panels." Dylan's mind raced. The LED panels were a critical part of the presentation, displaying key visuals and branding. Losing them would be a blow, but not as catastrophic as a full system crash. He needed to make a call, and fast. "Clara," Dylan said, "can you overlay the panel visuals onto the livestream feed?" Clara hesitated. "It'll look weird on site, but the online audience won't notice." "You sure?" "We don't have a choice," Dylan said. "Do it." As Clara worked to adjust the feed, Dylan turned to Ravi. "Dim the panel lights slightly. It might ease the load." Ravi nodded and tapped on his tablet, the brightness of the panels dipping just enough to reduce the strain without compromising visibility. The flickering stopped, and Dylan exhaled, though his relief was short-lived. The event wasn't over yet. The Q&A session wrapped up without further incident, but the near miss left the team on edge. Dylan's calm exterior belied the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. He knew they were walking a thin line, and every decision carried the risk of tipping them over the edge. As the final segment of the event approached, the team regrouped for a brief check-in. Dylan's eyes scanned the room, taking in the exhaustion etched on their faces. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady. "One more segment, and then we're done. Let's finish strong." The team nodded, their shared determination evident. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And so, with the clock ticking down and the finish line in sight, BrightPulse Productions prepared for the final act. A moment that would test not only their skills but their resilience as a team. Chapter 7, Against the Clock. The final segment of the event loomed large on the horizon, both a promise and a threat. The BrightPulse team had held everything together by the thinnest threads, improvising solutions that strained the limits of their ingenuity. But now, in the final act, they faced their greatest challenge yet. Not just surviving, but delivering an unforgettable conclusion. The hall was abuzz with the energy of the audience, the executives poised for the finale, a grand multimedia showcase that combined every element BrightPulse specialized in: synchronized lighting, immersive soundscapes, dynamic visuals on the LED panels, and of course, a flawless live stream. It was everything they were good at rolled into one ambitious presentation. But behind the scenes, cracks were starting to show again. "Clara, how's the stream looking?" Dylan asked, his voice calm despite the growing tension. "It's holding," Clara replied. The strain in her voice was evident as she adjusted the cameras for a sweeping stage shot. "But I'm maxing out the system. If we push it any harder, I can't promise it'll hold." Dylan nodded. "Do what you can. We're almost there. Jake stood at the audio console, fine-tuning the dramatic opening music. Sound levels are solid, he reported, but if this is going to work, we'll need timing to be perfect. One slip and it'll all fall apart. Noted, Dylan said. He turned to Ravi. Lighting. I've programmed the main sequences, Ravi replied, but we're still limited by manual cues. It won't be seamless, but it'll get the job done. Dylan's gaze shifted to Marco, who was monitoring the power supply like a hawk. Marco status? Marco's fingers danced over the controls as he checked the readings. Power stable for now, but the load's creeping up again. If the final sequence runs long, we might risk another surge. Dylan took a deep breath, the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. This was it. The moment they had worked for, fought for. The odds weren't in their favor, but giving up had never been an option. All right, team, Dylan said, his voice steady and commanding. This is the last push. Whatever happens, we finish this strong. Let's show them what we're made of. The team nodded, their resolve hardening. This wasn't just about the event anymore. It was about proving to themselves and to each other that they could rise to the occasion no matter the odds. As the audience quieted and the lights dimmed, the opening music swelled, filling the hall with an electric anticipation. The LED panels came to life, displaying vivid animations that transitioned seamlessly into the live visuals Clara had prepared. The stage lights pulsed in time with the music, casting dramatic shadows that heightened the atmosphere. From the command center, Dylan and Marco watched intently, their eyes darting between the monitors and the equipment. Every second felt like an eternity, each moment a delicate balance between triumph and disaster. Then, as the presentation reached its midpoint, the unthinkable happened. A warning alarm blared from the power supply, its sharp tone slicing through the focused silence of the team. Marco's eyes widened as he saw the readings spike. Dylan, he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. We're overloading. If this keeps up, we'll lose everything. Dylan's mind raced. They were too far in to stop now, but if the power supply failed, the entire event would collapse. He needed a solution, and fast. Ravi! Dylan called out. Dim the stage lights to 50%. We need to reduce the load. Ravi moved quickly, the stage lights softening to a more subdued glow. The power readings stabilized slightly, but not enough. Clara, Dylan continued, can you cut the background animations on the LED panels? Clara hesitated. It'll look flat. Do it. Dylan interrupted. We don't have a choice. Clara complied, switching the panels to display static visuals. The immediate reduction in power demand was noticeable, but it still wasn't enough to guarantee stability. Marco stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. We can redistribute the load across the auxiliary channels, but it'll take a few seconds to reroute. I'll need someone to monitor the systems while I do it. I'll handle it, Dylan said without hesitation. Go. Marco nodded and set to work, his hands moving with a confidence that belied his inexperience. Dylan took over monitoring the power levels, calling out adjustments to the team as needed. Jake, lower the bass frequencies on the music. Ravi, delay the next lighting cue by 2 seconds. Clara, keep the live stream steady, no sudden switches. One by one, the team executed Dylan's commands, their coordination a testament to the trust they had built throughout the day. The power readings began to stabilize, the alarm fading into silence. And then, with a final keystroke, Marco completed the rerouting. The power supply hummed smoothly, the load evenly distributed across the channels. We're stable. Marco announced, his voice filled with relief. Dylan exhaled deeply, a rare smile crossing his face. Good work, Marco. Good work, everyone. The final segment continued without further incident, the team's efforts culminating in a breathtaking conclusion that left the audience in awe. As the lights dimmed for the last time and the hall erupted in applause, the BrightPulse team exchanged glances, their exhaustion giving way to a shared sense of triumph. They had done it. Chapter 8, The Aftermath. As the final applause died down and the audience began to file out, The BrightPulse team remained at their stations, their hearts still racing from the intensity of the event. The grand multimedia showcase had not only succeeded, but had exceeded expectations. The client's beaming expression and the executive's nods of approval were proof of the team's triumph. Dylan stood at the command center, watching the monitors as the lights on stage dimmed completely. He exhaled a long, relieved breath that seemed to carry the weight of the day. Turning to the others, he said, "That's it. We did it." Clara pushed her chair back and stretched, her face lighting up in a rare smile. "And we didn't even break the live stream. A miracle, if I say so myself." Jake leaned against the audio console, a grin spreading across his face. "I don't know about you all, but I feel like I just ran a marathon. Someone better have a cold beer waiting after this." "You're buying, Jake," Clara quipped, though her exhaustion softened the jab. Ravi shut down his lighting grid tablet, his calm demeanor hiding the quiet pride he felt. The static lighting wasn't ideal, but I think it worked in our favor. It gave the showcase an elegant simplicity. Dylan turned to Marco, who was still at the power supply, triple-checking the readings, out of habit. "Marco," Dylan called, his voice full of gratitude. "You saved us back there. I know today wasn't easy, but you pulled through when it mattered most." Marco looked up, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. I didn't want to let anyone down," he said quietly. "You didn't," Dylan said firmly. "You proved you're more than ready to be part of this team." The words hit Marco like a wave, washing away the doubt and guilt that had haunted him all day. He nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through. As the team began packing up the equipment, the tension that had defined the day gave way to a lighter, almost celebratory atmosphere. Jake started recounting a story about a past gig that had gone wrong in the most spectacular way, his booming laughter filling the room. Clara chimed in with her own tales of production chaos, while Ravi listened with quiet amusement. Dylan joined in occasionally, but for the most part, he watched his team with a sense of pride and gratitude. They had been pushed to their limits, but they had emerged stronger, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. As they finished loading the last of the equipment onto the truck, Dylan turned to the group. "All right, everyone, drinks are on me tonight. You've all earned it. Now you're talking," Jake said, slapping Dylan on the back. The team piled into the van, their exhaustion temporarily forgotten, as they headed to a nearby pub to celebrate their victory. The laughter and camaraderie that filled the evening were a stark contrast to the tension of the day, a reminder of why they did what they did. For Marco, the night marked a turning point. As he sat with his teammates, laughing and sharing stories, he realized he wasn't just a new guy anymore. He was part of something bigger, a team that believed in him even when he doubted himself. As the team raised their glasses in a toast, Dylan summed up the day's events in a single sentence. To BrightPulse Productions, proving that no matter the challenge, we're always up for the fight. The clinking of glasses echoed in the air, a symbol of their resilience, their teamwork, and their shared commitment to excellence. And as the night wore on, the struggles of the day became just another story to add to their growing collection of war stories, an experience that would bond them for years to come.